What's going on, everybody? Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and whatever time it is. So welcome back to yet another video with man, Overhauled. And ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause is required as the Divide Et Impera Overhaul mod for Total War Rome 2 is being updated. Woo! Yes, I know that's exciting. We now have the 1.3 update in beta. So what does beta mean? Beta means basically that the update is essentially finished. They're rolling out the build to the public so anybody can come in and test it. There might be some minor adjustments or minor bug fixes being made, but right now you can get involved in the newest DEI update and you should be fine with continuing your campaign saves from 1.3 beta to the main build once they do update it. I would not recommend that you use previous save games such as the 1.2.8 update and anything before that with this. You should be able to still play it, however, you may find some certain incompatibilities or things just not working appropriately. A new campaign, a new save game would be best. So as many of you may know, Divide Et Impera has been releasing various submods for the DEI mod over the last several months. A lot of these mods have been tailored towards overhauling the campaign through various means. For example, we've had the Celtic Barbarian overhauls, we've had the Grand Campaign overhaul itself, and we've even had a alternate campaign mod that has been added into the campaign. However, that is not yet being added into the main mod. It might not ever be, but the main point is that the Divide Et Impera team has been giving us insight into this update for some time. So today, in this video, we'll be talking about the broad highlights of what to expect with the DEI 1.3 new update. Let's do it, everybody. So the first and possibly most exciting thing for many people out there is the faction overhauls. And this pertains primarily towards the Barbarian factions, aka the Celts. This also includes the Germanic factions though, and in fact this includes 13 different playable factions. 13 factions have had their rosters either completely overhauled or overhauled to a more moderate degree, in addition to having certain changes done to units that are already existing. Essentially, all of these factions have been rebalanced to have more purpose and more immersive styles of fighting and units. So just with these even minor changes to some of these factions are having a very large impact across them. You'll also notice that a lot of the UI changes for the factions have occurred primarily in the department of unit cards, so there might not be necessarily new units for every single little different type of unit, but many unit cards have been overhauled to just look a lot better, and from what I've seen so far, they look better across the board, which is very exciting. I will of course do faction overviews for all of these factions that have been overhauled, even though I have already done some factions overviews on them. So if you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe to be able to check out those faction overview videos where I break down the situation for all factions and I go over their military roster and just some helpful tips and tricks, and I talk about their level of difficulty. So make sure you check out my faction overview series from what I've already done and what is still coming. However, let's move on to the next biggest thing in this update. So the next biggest thing is the Grand Campaign itself has been overhauled. This is basically due to a conglomeration of lots of minor to moderate changes being compiled together and pushed together in this update. For example, you have more building slots available now. Before, you had some regions that were restricted to just like 3 building slots. Now, every single region has at least 4 building slots available. Some of the larger regions, which, keep in mind, a region is just a city and the buildings you can build inside of that city, not a whole province. Some of them have been increased to have a maximum of 6 total buildings, thus allowing you to build more options for your cities. Whether you want to try to maximize output, try to make things a little bit more immersive for your cities. Basically, the choices are endless with this, and it just allows further customization, which I really love and would love to see even more of. Of course, there is the wonder buildings that have been added in this update. They have been completely overhauled and redone. I have already done a video covering the wonder buildings and all of their effects, so I highly recommend you go ahead and check that out. I'll be sure to leave a link down below into how the wonders in DEI work. Also, historical families have been overhauled, which is probably my single most favorite thing about this update. I know to some people it might not be as big of a deal, but I'm all about, dare I say, immersion. So when we get ruling families of nations being made to be more immersive and more historical, I am all for it. For example, when you play as the Carthaginian family, the Barcids, you actually play as the real-life Hannibal's grandfather Hannibal. He's already married, and he actually has a son, Hamilcar, who was the actual father of Hannibal. So you get to already start off with that family tree, expand it, and do whatever you like with it, essentially. And the best part is that you're not forced into having to roleplay or anything. Just the option is there if you want to take the family trees a little bit more seriously, play historically, or you just want to go crazy and give Hannibal 10 different children. Do whatever you like. This is Total War, of course. You'll also see some pretty big changes in regards to cultures and statistics for those cultures. For example, many of the regions have been rebalanced to have more historically authentic regions. I noticed this especially in my minor test campaign I did as Carthage. A lot of the African provinces don't really have Punic as the dominant culture in them, and that's rightly so, because Carthage was more of a coastal superpower. They didn't really control too much territory, at least not directly, inland, and that was very more Numidian and North African. So you will see these cultures' percentage changes being balanced in a way that reflects the more immersive form of gameplay, essentially. We then also have the starting political situations being completely redone. I've talked about this more in the previous video where we covered the Grand Campaign Revised Submods, so again, I won't try to go into too much detail, but essentially, politics for every single faction in the game has been overhauled to be more historically immersive and balanced. For example, Egypt and Cyrenaica automatically start at war, whereas before, Cyrenaica was a client state of Egypt. So you do have these minor changes that will make a very big impact on your early game. Moving forward, the next big thing in this update is an entire rework of all skills, ancillaries, and personal traits. This is a big one. This is where we'll see all skill trees being reworked and adjusted for better trade-offs and better balance overall. It makes more sense. You'll also see traditions and ancillaries, those little things you collect and assign to your characters, have been redone to give you more purpose in the choices you make. And then, of course, the personal traits of actual characters have been redone. That is to say, their personality has now been more redefined. So far, from what I've seen, this is fantastic, and I'm very, very happy to see this change. Hopefully you guys will be as well. And then the next big branch of the update is loyalty changes and new government technologies. These guys kind of go hand in hand, because loyalty has been adjusted to be not so high for characters that are in empires. And when you usually formed an empire, you would get a slight buff to certain characters for loyalty. Now that is not the case, or at least not to such a high and easy degree. Loyalty negatives occur earlier in campaigns. I'm not sure how severe these negative debuffs are. It will be interesting to see how it plays out in the long run, but so far I'm hearing good things, and I love anything that adds another layer to the complexities of the campaign, because let's be honest, the campaign overall in Total War Rome 2 is pretty simple, so hopefully DEI can give us even more complicated features to help out with that. You'll also notice that some technologies have now been given different effects based on the government type that the faction is. For example, Barbarian factions or cultures can now reduce their upkeep for military units when they are in a tribal confederation government. So you'll be wanting to keep an eye out for that based on what kind of government you have, and maybe you'll want to make the switch simply just to get certain buffs and avoid certain debuffs based on the technologies you need to research. So again, just adding a little bit more depth to technology, which is otherwise a pretty blanketed subject, but it's actually turning out to be very, very nice. I really like it myself. We'll then also see more technological changes for the Greeks, Rome, and Carthage. They will have military technologies that will lower loyalty but can be offset if you have them research certain philosophical technologies. All factions will receive a late game technology that will improve happiness and slave unrest when you are the empire government type, thus creating an actual reason in the end game for you to want to become an empire. And then we have dozens of miscellaneous changes that are occurring throughout the entire mod. I'm sure there's probably even over 100 or more that haven't been completely listed. But essentially, there's a lot of bug fixing that's happening, of course. There's still even other changes that have been added to the campaign which will still affect your gameplay, but in not such a massive way that you may notice if you weren't told about it. For example, there are fewer resources that you will receive from main city building change. You know, sometimes when you have a resource in a province, you'll hover over the village or the city building chain, and you'll notice that that city building itself produces X amount of resources. Well, now it still will, but it will be doing a lot less. This basically forces you to have to choose between, do you want to get more resources and build a specifically resource dedicated building, or are you going to settle for just a very small amount of resources? It's up to you. There's also new pirate factions and pirate spawn locations. Before, they were getting a little bit predictable. Now they're shaking things up even more, so that's going to be something you need to be careful of. And another nice change is that there's actually been some grand campaign performance improvements, the extent of which is yet to be determined, and I'm sure will definitely be up to the user, depending on your computer, submods you're using, and a whole load of other things. But generally speaking, there seems to be better performance with the grand campaign, and to be honest, I've even experienced it in my battles so far, but I'll have to wait and see if that's due to the update or whatnot. But basically, there's just lots of little changes that are coming in that are having pretty big impacts on the campaign. For example, that new pirate spawn location change, I mean, that could really rock your kingdom or empire if you start getting pirates spawning in a certain area that you're not prepared for. So it's going to be very interesting to see how deep the campaign gets now with all of these changes. But what's the verdict on 1.3? Overall, it seems to be that the DEI team is continuing down the highway of immersion and replayability more than ever. So not only do you have more options if you want to be immersive and kind of roleplay your faction, or you just want to have a lot of replayability. It's catering to both types of gamers. Some people just want to do it and just get their Chad Galatians to go on a big romp across Anatolia with all their naked swordsmen. Go ahead and do that. You want to play as the Galatians and play as like a mercenary for hire faction, try to get some diplomacy happening with notoriously historic factions like Egypt, you can do that too. It's basically up to you, and it seems to be that the DEI team is taking us down that road where they're keeping both styles of gameplay open and basically as a priority. They're not favoring one or the other. At least that's my opinion on the subject. Some people might feel differently. It also seems to be that there's more strategy being put into the mod. You now have to take into account the decisions in what buildings you want to build and where. Having more building options basically means that you may want to try and specialize certain provinces even more, or you might want to do the opposite and try and have all of your cities be a little bit more independent of each other by spreading out your resources, thus denying the enemy from taking any important cities and losing a massive amount of income or food. It's kind of up to you. Going forward, I would kind of like to see a little bit more attention thrown into the eastern factions. The nomads probably could do with maybe a little bit of gameplay change overhauls. Nothing too crazy, but something a little bit more substantial. The Arabs and just Persians overall, I would really love to see get some more attention in future updates. But that's just my personal opinion. What would you like to see in the next DEI update? Comment down below. But anyway, ladies and gentlemen, thank you all so much for watching. I really hope you guys are all as excited as I am for this. Expect a lot more DEI content coming out on the channel in the near future. But anyway, thank you all so much for watching. Hope you guys enjoyed, and I shall see you in the next one.